Tales from Vespera, written by Cass V. Flint, published by Trailspan Press, forged in dust, printed in legend. Chapter 1, The Fifth Moon Rises. The Birth of Vespera. Long before the saloons of Rust Point buzzed with whiskey-slick deals and duels under starlight, long before the Trailspan Express laid its first glimmering track across the scorched skin of the Iron Range, there was only silence. The planet now known as Vespera hung in the velvet darkness of space like a secret waiting to be told. Located on the fringe of a once bustling galactic trade lane, it orbited a red giant star with a strange dignity. But what truly set it apart, what whispered of fate to those who first discovered it, were its 5 moons. Like glowing sentinels, they circled Vespera in perfect harmony, casting pale silver tides across its dusky surface. No other known world bore such celestial symmetry. It was the first sign that this place, though hostile, was touched by something profound. Among the settlers, theories bloomed like wildfires. Some believed the moons were remnants of a shattered god, orbiting out of penance. Others insisted they were artificial machines left behind by unknown aliens. And still others, the more scientifically minded, tracked their gravitational pull with reverence, claiming their patterns subtly altered local consciousness. Whether guides, sentinels, or simple rocks, one truth endured: the moons watched. Vespera's surface was a patchwork of harsh beauty. Great salt flats shimmered in perpetual twilight, refracting the crimson light of its dying sun into kaleidoscopic mirages. Towering obsidian cliffs sliced across the horizon like the teeth of ancient giants, their jagged faces hiding caverns of immense mineral wealth. The northern hemisphere was dominated by volcanic ridges that glowed faintly with subsurface heat, while the south offered rolling prairies of strange fibrous grasses that swayed even when no wind touched them. And across all of it blew a constant breeze that whispered in tones uncannily like a human voice, as though the planet itself remembered being touched. The early survey probes dispatched by EarthNet marked Vespera as marginally habitable. Its oxygen content was sufficient, gravity tolerable, and native biosigns scarce enough to avoid conflict. But Vespera was never meant to be home. It was labeled as a resource world, a way station for the mineral-hungry engines of Earth's post-industrial expansion. And so came the first settlers, not pilgrims but pragmatists, contracted miners, rogue terraformers, eco-engineers cast out from more lucrative projects. They arrived in modular ships designed to become habitats, jettisoning their descent pods like seeds into the crust of the world. They were a motley crew, humans genetically augmented for hard labor, clone line veterans of terraforming wars, and even a few off-world xeno-engineers seeking secrets in Vespera's geological anomalies. They dug, they built, they mapped the mineral veins with obsessive precision. Chief among their prizes was Vesperium, a mineral unique to the planet, a dense, radiant or that hummed when exposed to electromagnetic fields. Its properties baffled early science. Part conductor, part energy amplifier, Vesperium became the lifeblood of the early colonies, fueling reactors, stabilizing atmospheres, and feeding the ambitions of distant EarthNet stakeholders. But the planet did not bend easily. Machines rusted overnight. Geomagnetic storms flared without warning, crippling communication relays. The fibergrass prairies sometimes shifted location entirely, seemingly rearranging their layouts in patterns that defied cartographic logic. Colonists began to report hallucinations, dreams of 5 pale figures watching them from ridgelines and cliffs. The moons, it was said, moved not with gravity but with intent. That observation, unsettling at first, became the seed of faith. What began as a whispered worry turned into doctrine. The moons were not only sentient but purposeful. Over time, their apparent synchronicity became the cornerstone of Vesperan culture. What settlers once feared, they came to follow. Then came the silence. It began with signal drift. EarthNet updates grew sluggish. Data packets arrived corrupted, timestamps warped by gravitational anomalies. Entire bandwidths collapsed. Then, abruptly, all communications ceased. No messages from Earth. No satellite relays. The galactic beacon darkened. First, they waited. Days turned to months, then years. Without resupply or governance, the colonies fractured. Some tried to preserve earthnet structures. Others reverted to barter and tribal leadership. A few devolved into chaos. Still others rejected all forms of structure altogether, wandering nomadic across the prairies, muttering that no voice but the wind could be trusted. From these came the first seeds of what would become the untamed. The survivors adapted. They created new technologies from broken pieces of old ones. They engineered new forms of agriculture using the native fibergrass and repurposed dustbacks, giant, tusked herd. Beasts once hunted for sport, into livestock. The few remaining functional AIs were worshipped as digital prophets, their fragmented algorithms interpreted like sacred texts. In those early years, water had to be mined from frost cliffs. Food was synthesized from nutrient algae that tasted like engine oil. Births took place in rusting freight containers. Some froze to death next to fusion generators that powered only flickering lamps. The silence was not merely absence. It was war with the void. Yet Vespera did not let them forget. 1 decade into the silence, strange signals began to bleed through the static. At first, they were nonsense, bursts of archaic human speech, distorted images, and ghostly melodies. Over time, they resolved into patterns. Moving pictures, black and white dramas, men in hats, women in bonnets, guns drawn in dusty streets, trains cutting across golden deserts. The settlers had rediscovered television, but not just any broadcast. They received only one genre, Westerns. Historians would later theorize that these signals were remnants of mid-20th century Earth culture, bouncing through space as lost echoes of an analog age. Somehow, the curve of Vespera's moons and magnetic anomalies caught them like a net, concentrating only this fragment of Earth's memory. To the survivors of Vespera, these ghost broadcasts became scripture. The Westerns were more than entertainment. They were prophecy. The settlers watched them obsessively, dissected their lessons, quoted their dialogue as law. They saw themselves in the drifters and lawmen, in the gamblers and ranchers, in the hardscrabble towns fighting for survival. Slowly, they adopted the customs. Clothing styles shifted. Settlements were renamed. Tools were reforged to resemble revolvers, even if they fired ionized pellets. Saloon culture was reborn. But more than that, they found unity. From the chaos rose a code. They called it the Law of Fives, echoing the celestial guardians above. 5 sacred moons. 5 archetypal roles: rancher, miner, gambler, gunslinger, surveyor. 5 stages of the settler's journey: arrival, struggle, claim, confrontation, legacy. 5 core structures to civilization: store, mine, ranch, rail, and saloon. And no town could have more than 5 laws. That was the sacred limit. Under the Law of Fives, a new society blossomed. They weren't trying to return to Earth anymore. They were building something new, a fusion of memory and myth. They became Vesperans. And so the world changed. The environment responded. The fibergrass prairies ceased their erratic shifting. Magnetic storms grew less frequent. The moons aligned more precisely than ever before. To some, it was proof of planetary sentience. To others, divine approval. Towns formed around key resources and natural defenses. Rust Point with its thermal vents and dustback herds. Iron Howl, nestled between obsidian ridges and hidden mines. Moonspur, built on the spine of an ancient dry riverbed where all 5 moons converge in the sky. Each town adopted a sheriff, but never more than one gunslinger. Every duel was a sacred rite, every build a legacy etched in steel and ore. And always the trail beckoned. The people of Vespera weren't meant to stay still. The legacy of the rail called to them. They mapped out the magnetic paths that hummed beneath the crust. With salvage tech and sacred purpose, they began constructing the Trailspan Express. Not just a means of travel, a symbol. A great silver vein connecting the dreams of every town. Rail became more than transport. It became prophecy. The fifth moon rose higher than the rest that year, bathing the Iron Range in holy silver. The elders took it as a sign. The frontier would open once more. The land, long silent, had told its tale. And now it was time for new ones. Chapter 2: Ghosts in the Static. It started with a flicker, a single moment of interference in the static of the cold band receivers salvaged from EarthNet wreckage. On a clear night in the high mesas of the Obsidian Cliffs, a prospector named Rel Storm sat alone by the antenna array, tuning the old broadcast loops as he did every dusk. Normally, the receivers emitted nothing but white noise and occasional planetary harmonics. But that night, something different arrived. It was a melody, fragmented, alien, human. A piano tune, looped and broken by static. Then the flicker of motion. A man in a wide-brimmed hat, walking down a dusty street. A camera angle. A narrative. Torm fell to his knees. He called it a vision. Within days, more signals arrived. Screens lit up in bunkers and saloons, mines and spires. All across Vespera, people turned their eyes from the dusty soil to the flickering glow of the past. And it was always the same genre, Earth Westerns. These weren't interactive holograms or immersive holodramas. They were old, grainy, black and white, occasionally colorized, full of swagger and silence, frontier justice and reckless honor. To the survivors of Vespera, these were not recordings. They were relics. The planet had gone silent, and now it was speaking. The broadcasts became known as the ghost signal. They were unpredictable but powerful. Theories spread like wildfire. Some said it was the planet itself, playing back Earth's final message. Others claimed the moons were antennas for the soul of humanity. But all agreed on one thing: it meant something. Over time, they resolved into patterns. Moving pictures, black and white dramas, men in hats, women in bonnets, guns drawn in dusty streets, trains cutting across golden deserts. The settlers had rediscovered television. Some noticed strange consistencies. Certain episodes repeated with uncanny regularity. Others seemed to respond to lunar alignment. A few even appeared to change slightly from one broadcast to the next. Whispered theories hinted that the broadcasts were not random, but chosen. Towns gathered to watch together. Projectors were installed in every saloon. Scribes began transcribing dialogue onto parchment scrolls. Children were named after heroes like Dylan, Cassidy, or Paladin. And slowly, Vesperan culture began to shift. With each new episode, settlers learned more than stories. They absorbed values. The concepts of justice, loyalty, betrayal, redemption. Entire social norms were born from one-liners uttered in smoky saloons or on the wind-blown streets of fictional desert towns. One particularly revered broadcast became known as the Sermon at Noon, where a lone gunslinger chose not to draw his weapon, sacrificing himself for a town that hated him. That episode's script was canonized. To this day, a copy is etched on the wall of the chapel of the fifth moon in Moonspur. Worship, too, began to change. The 5 moons, once feared as celestial anomalies, became the 5 witnesses, guardians who watched all settlers' deeds. Prayers were recited with spurred boots on altar steps. Weddings were sealed with oaths drawn from classic Western monologues. Even architecture evolved. Wood and stone facades were designed to mimic the saloon fronts seen in the broadcasts, despite the alien nature of local materials. Synthetics were shaped to resemble timber. Signs were carved by hand in fold earth calligraphy. The world became a living stage set to ancient dreams. The ghost signal grew stranger. Sometimes it would loop a single episode for days. Sometimes a new fragment would appear in the middle of a sermon. Occasionally, it would broadcast in silence, a single static-filled image of a train or a distant desert. These were taken as signs, prophecies, omens. Interpretation societies emerged. The Silver Reel cult claimed each episode carried codes to a greater truth. The Order of the Dust Lens believed the signals were sent by a post-human Earth that had transcended flesh. Others, like the Guild of Reclaimed Memory, tried to reconstruct Earth's timeline through the fragments. What no one expected, what truly changed everything, was the event settlers call the full recast. It occurred exactly 33 years after the first ghost signal, during a rare alignment of all 5 moons in the eastern sky. That night, across every working screen and projection rig on Vespera, a full Earth broadcast aired, unedited, uninterrupted. It was a feature-length Western. The tale of a man falsely accused, his exile to a frontier town, his redemption through grit and sacrifice. A fictional film. But to the people of Vespera, it was scripture made whole. Entire settlements halted for the duration of the broadcast. No duels were held. No structures built. All eyes were fixed. The day after, the Law of Fives was formally etched into stone. Settlers began assigning themselves one of the 5 roles: gunslinger, gambler, rancher, miner, or surveyor, not as jobs but as identities. You didn't do the role. You became it. New children were trained from youth in the lore and skill of their path. Duels were no longer personal disputes, but ceremonial judgments. Gambles determined land rights. Surveys mapped not just terrain but spiritual alignment. And all of it, every action, every building, every code of conduct, was informed by the ghost signal. Vespera had become more than a colony. It had become a reenactment, a sacred performance, a civilization born from static. But deep beneath the reverence, tension brewed. Not everyone trusted the signal. Some settlers, especially those with preserved EarthNet tech, began noticing patterns too precise, loops too clean. A few theorists believed the signal was being curated, that something still living was choosing what to show. They called it the curator. A myth? Perhaps. But rumors spread that in the special zones, those magnetic no-man's lands between settlements, strange equipment could be found. Towering antennae shaped like bone. Fossils that pulsed when a signal aired. And in the saloon of Rust Point, a whispered tale began. Of a gunslinger who walked through a ghost signal broadcast, vanishing into the screen mid-duel. Whether omen or hallucination, one thing was clear. The ghost signal had changed everything. And it was far from finished. Chapter 3: The Iron Range Compact. Before the compact, there was only drift. The ghost signal had reshaped culture, yes, but it had not united the frontier. Towns like Rust Point, Moonspur, and Ironhowl operated as independent enclaves, ruled by their own codes and customs. Trade was erratic. Violence flared without warning. Territory lines shifted like dust in the prairie wind. Every settlement had a sheriff, every sheriff their own gunslinger, but there was no law that stretched across the Iron Range. That changed the year of the long dustfall, a planet-wide drought that shriveled dustback herds, collapsed 2 major mines, and left half the northern settlements on the brink of starvation. With Vesperium supplies dwindling and trade routes severed by raiders, it became clear no town would survive alone. The call went out from Rust Point. Jude Flint, saloon owner and part-time preacher of the 5 Witnesses, used the saloon's upper loft to transmit a message across the frontier using a refurbished EarthNet comtower. His voice, rough with grit and gospel, echoed through every speaker still alive in the Iron Range. The moons don't ride apart in the sky. They circle together. Maybe it's time we learned from them. Representatives from 13 towns made the journey to Rust Point that season. They arrived by foot, dustback, sandstrider, and even jury-rigged rail sled. Cass Flint, Jude's sibling and Rust Point's marshal, greeted them personally beneath the silver banners of the 5 roles. What followed was not peace but possibility. The summit became known as the Railfire Council, for the flare lit above the saloon's rooftop, a signal of truce. Delegates debated for days, sometimes coming to blows, but they stayed, because outside the frontier was dying. From this tension emerged the idea of a mutual path. Inspired by the ghost broadcast of Iron Rails to Glory, where rival towns joined forces to build a line that saved both, the council agreed. A single rail must unite them all. They called it the Trailspan Express. More than a train line, it was to be a shared artery of commerce, culture, and law, a literal bond between outposts scattered across Vespera. Construction would begin from 5 major towns, each aligned with one role of the Law of Fives. Rust Point, gunslinger; Iron Howl, miner; Moonspur, surveyor; Dunevale, gambler; and Haydrift, rancher. Each would lay rail outward, toward a shared center marked only by a cairn of stacked or in bone, the crossings. The trail span was to connect the entire Iron Range, not just physically, but spiritually. Every rail laid became a ritual, every spike driven a sermon. Local surveyors attuned their instruments not only to the terrain but to the celestial positions of the moons, believing that the rails must echo lunar harmony. Some claimed you could hear the future in the sound of the spike hitting iron. What they didn't know was that every mile laid would become more than transit. It would become memory. The trail span didn't just carry trains. Carried legacy. The echoes of each build would one day feed into what Vesperans would call rail lore. But the building was not without cost. Saboteurs, calling themselves the Untamed, believed the ghost signal was a cage, that the Law of Fives was a fiction designed to domesticate the wild soul of Vespera. They struck convoys, derailed engines, and dismantled rails under moonlight. Whole sections of track vanished overnight. The compact survived by adapting. Each rail town began assigning dual-role marshals, representatives chosen not only for their combat prowess, but their allegiance to construction and law. These hybrid enforcers, called Iron Marshals, rode the line, protecting build crews and negotiating disputes. Their badges bore twin sigils, the town's emblem and the spiral glyph of the moons. Among them rose legends. Sarah Vale, the silver-eyed surveyor who mapped the unstable basin in a single ride. Jasper Slate, the crystalline-boned miner who forged temporary rails from heated Vesperium shards. Lucky Lyle, the bioelectric gambler who won the rights to Crossings itself in a 5-town card game. Through dust, sabotage, and sacred duel, the trail span grew. Its most dangerous stretch was the Special Zone, a magnetic no-man's land littered with tectonic traps, echo fissures, and unpredictable rail warps. Many crews refused to cross it. Some believed the curator haunted the zone, that its ghost machines watched, waited, and judged. Still, the rails reached. When the final link was forged at Crossings, a ceremonial engine, built of scrap and sacred ore, made the inaugural run. 5 banners flew from its caboose. Each represented a role. Each was kissed by moonlight. The people wept. And the compact was signed, not with ink, but with Vesperium dust, pressed into steel plates and buried beneath the central track. A vow to ride together or fall apart. From that moment on, the Iron Range was no longer a tangle of competing towns. It was a nation of the rail, bound by oath, forged in dust, guided by 5 moons, and watched always by the signal. Chapter 4: Rust and Remembrance. In the quiet after the compact, when the rail dust had begun to settle and the trail span express pulsed like a silver artery across the Iron Range, a new force began to rise, one not forged in law or council, but in reputation. The Vesperans had always believed in legacy. Every duel, every claim, every deal struck beneath starlight was a line etched into the cultural ledger. But now, with the rail uniting settlements and tales crossing town borders faster than a sandstrider in full gallop, the age of individual legends had begun. They were called Trailblazers, not because they built the rail, but because they redefined what it meant to ride it. The first to rise was Rough as Red, the fire-born gunslinger of Rust Point. His story was whispered in every saloon. How he rode through a dust-backed stampede blindfolded, pistols holstered, guiding a shipment of orphans to safety. Or how he faced down 6 untamed raiders on the cracked rails near the maw and walked away with nothing but scorched boots and a fresh scar. But Ruff's was only the beginning. Silva Moon, gambler and ghostwalker of the Dunevale drift towns, made her name not through force, but fate. She won the deed to an entire rail sector with a single flip of a 2-headed coin, then donated it to found the Moonlight Academy, where orphan children were trained in the 5 sacred roles. Orin Ironhand, the lava-blooded miner, was said to have punched through a collapsed tunnel with his bare exoclad fists to rescue an entire dig crew. He forged a new alloy from the melted debris, ironfire vesperite, and used it to build a rail segment that's never needed repair. And then there was Dagger Delaney. Some called her Myth, others Omen, but all agreed that wherever the special zone shimmered like heat on glass, she appeared. Her long-range rifle, the Obsidian Kiss, was said to speak before thunder came. Delaney never took a side in the war between Order and Untamed. She rode between. The Trailblazers weren't appointed. They weren't elected. They were witnessed. Every act they performed rippled through the rails. Tales of their deeds traveled faster than the trains themselves. Jude Flint began collecting these stories at the Rust Point Saloon, compiling them in a great leather-bound ledger known only as the Book of Dust. Pages were added weekly. Some were etched in gold leaf, others in blood. To be named in the Book of Dust was to step into immortality. But fame bred more than reverence. It bred challenge. You could only call yourself a trailblazer if others sang your story. And for every name risen in honor, another tried to rise in opposition. The Widow's Riders, a rogue faction of untamed loyalists, declared their own list of infamous legends. Outlaws who blew rails, swindled or freighters, and disrupted compact meetings. They claimed their own heroes. Crake Dustmouth Thorn, who derailed an engine by singing to it until its guidance AI failed. Madra Vale, twin sister of Sarah Vale, who burned the moon chapel at crossings and etched her manifesto into its stone floor, believing the ghost signal to be a cage designed to erase true freedom. The Iron Marshals fought to protect the legends, but not every tale could be shielded. Some trailblazers vanished. Others fell in silent duels beneath the moons. Yet the myth endured. Children began choosing their heroes. Miners sang ballads as they drilled. Saloons painted portraits of legendary rides. Entire settlements reenacted old deeds, down to the dust in the boots. Even the rails seemed to remember. On fogged nights, some swear they see glowing images of trailblazers riding spectral trains across the horizon. Old AIs embedded in track relays sometimes echo names that no living settler recalls: Kira Vane, the Howler of Spire Gulch, Eden's Last Son. Writers called this phenomenon rail memory. Some say the planet is watching. Others say the signal is recording. But whatever the truth, the Trailblazers had become more than settlers, more than roles. They were the folklore made flesh, the song of rust and remembrance. And Vespera would never forget their names. Some say the next name is already being written. It just hasn't happened yet. And it might be yours. Chapter 5, Rails to Redemption, where every player writes the next verse. Vespera stands poised between past and future. Its skies glow with the reflection of 5 moons, each a sentinel of story. Its rails stretch like veins across a wild and whispering world. But the land is not tamed, not yet. The ghost signal still hums. The untamed still ride. And the balance between legend and law, chaos and order, trembles like a coin mid-flip. This is where you come in. You are not a settler. You are not a background figure. You are the next tale Vespera is waiting to tell. When you choose a role, rancher, gambler, gunslinger, miner, surveyor, you step into a tradition older than memory and fresher than the morning rail frost. Each path holds a truth, each ability, a legacy. As a gunslinger, you embody law and vengeance. The duels you win carve justice into the dust. You are both sword and shield. As a miner, you dig into the planet's bones, drawing forth the sacred or that powers the cities and crafts legends. You know the weight of value and the danger of greed. As a gambler, you live on the edge of fate, bending chance to your will. The signal favors those who dare. As a rancher, you ground the frontier, turning beasts into bread, land into home. Yours is the slow magic of sustainability. As a surveyor, you map the unseen, trace the lines that others will follow. You don't just build rails, you write prophecy. The world of Vespera responds to those who act. When you build a mine, the land remembers. When you lay rail, the moons shift ever so slightly. When you play an action card, it echoes with the same weight as a sermon. Even the hazards are not random. The special zone, scarred by tectonic memory and mythic interference, is more than a game mechanic. It is the trial by which the planet tests your resolve. Only those who endure it, who emerge from its haunted winds and fractured terrain, earn the right to be remembered. Victory points may tally who wins the game. But the true victory is being told. To end the game with your name etched in the ledger of Vespera, know not only for what you scored, but how you played. Did you ride with honor? Did you outwit a rail thief with a bluff? Did you place the final rail that completed a sacred loop? Did you hold the line against a dustback stampede with nothing but grit and a half-played card? Those moments become rail lore. The Book of Dust, still curated in Rust Point Saloon, grows every generation, and somewhere deep in the buried memory of the signal each game played, each ride taken, becomes part of the broadcast that shaped it all. You are not rewriting history. You are living it. Welcome to Vespera. Now, pick your path, lay your rail, and ride. Epilogue, the next step. The ledger is open for you to become part of Vespera's lore. Across the saloons, bunkhouses, and rail stations of Vespera, every tale begins the same way with a choice. Your choice. Do you gamble it all on a double-down bluff and a loaded die? Do you mine deeper than anyone? Before, risking collapse to uncover the widow's vein? Will you survey the unknown wilds for a magnetic route the moons have yet to bless? Or raise ranch fences where no hoof has ever settled? Or will you stand alone in the center of the crossings, eyes narrowed beneath your brim, and accept the duel that echoes across every rail? This is not a story with a fixed ending. This is a story with 5 beginnings. The board before you is no board. It is Vespera drawn flat so you may walk it. The pieces are not plastic, they are you. The tokens you gather are gold and yes, but also risk and memory. You are stepping into a living myth, where every turn is a tale, and every play reshapes the land. The ghost signal hums faintly now, like a breath drawn in. It's waiting. Set your meeple at the trailhead. Take your first turn. And may the moons ride with you.